Welcome to my review for Unexplored Unlocked Edition for the PlayStation 4. What is Unexplored? Well, it's a cyclically generated dungeon crawler with RPG and roguelite mechanics thrown in there for good measure. Now, backtracking a little to something I mentioned earlier, what is a cyclically generated dungeon, and how is it different when compared to a procedurally generated one? Well, I'm glad you asked, strawman in my head. Think of it like this. A procedurally generated dungeon is, put simply, a dungeon that is created randomly with a start and a finish in mind. A cyclical dungeon is generated similarly, but slightly differently. It's created so that instead of just one path to follow to the finish, it has many paths that lead forward and even backward. Sometimes, in order to complete puzzles, you must actually go back to previous floors after you've accessed either a new path, or you learn something from one of the many books strewn about the whole dungeon. As the lead developer, Joris Dormans, puts it, it doesn't feel as arbitrary as a random generation. It feels more handmade when you're playing. Now that that's out of the way, let's get to the meat and potatoes of this review. Controls. Overall, I have to say most of the controls translate well from the PC version of the game. It transitions very well to a dual-stick control scheme, and while some of the interactions with the menus can be a bit cumbersome to deal with when you first get started, namely pausing the game and arranging your inventory on the fly mid-battle, these issues will quickly be dealt with as you get more and more familiar with the game. Combat. For some, combat and how to deal with your enemies in a game can make or break a game-playing experience. I have to say that the combat in Unexplored looks rather simple at first glance, and in a lot of ways it is. But that's not to say that it isn't satisfying, though, because it is. The controls are fairly straightforward for the most part, and you have a decent amount of options to choose from in regard to weapons and tools with which to dispatch your foes. These can range from either a sword, a torch, a throwing dagger, or even a potion. The majority of weapons you use can be activated by either pressing or holding R2 or L2, depending on which hand it is in. Or, in the case of more traditional pokey and stabby implements, you can simply walk into enemies with the pointy side facing towards them, albeit for less damage than an actual directed attack. All in all, the combat is very satisfying, and very rarely, if ever, did I feel that a death I experienced was unfair or somehow out of my control. UI and menus. The presentation in regard to the UI and menus is very straightforward and clear in telling you exactly what you need to know at any given moment. And if you don't like how the UI looks, they do give a few options to change how it looks. One feature that I like is that by pausing the game with the circle button, you can use the right stick to identify almost anything on the screen, from vases to torches to even yourself. However, all that being said, as I mentioned earlier, the menus when you're first getting started can be a bit cumbersome to navigate in the middle of things. Between pressing circle to pause the game, R1 to bring up the inventory screen to go through your junk you have, which can also be opened via the X button, doing either of which will not pause the game, unlike if you were to press circle before opening your inventory. All of the above listed actions are closed if you move the left analog stick in any direction, by the way. So, if you're used to going through those types of screens with the analog stick, you will undoubtedly be opening and then accidentally closing your menus until you get used to using the D-pad to navigate them. But as I stated earlier, this complaint is something that will be rectified with just a few minutes of playing, I'd imagine. So, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that big a deal. Story. While I can't say there's a story per se, you can find little nuggets of lore here and there through most of the books you find throughout the dungeon, and you'll want to read every one of these books, as they often contain very useful information about puzzles, treasure, bosses and encounters you'll face, and sometimes funny little tidbits of lore, as mentioned earlier. These books and other things you find in the dungeon help the world feel more lived in as you progress, which I feel is a good thing. Difficulty. As far as roguelites are concerned, this isn't one of the hardest I've played, but it's no slouch either. I've found myself in several situations where a trap has activated behind me and gotten me stuck with 3 angry skeletons bearing down on me with all sorts of weaponry. I've rappelled down a crevasse with a rope only to end up in the middle of a horde of poisonous spiders. Now, the big question about difficulty is whether or not I feel the game is fair. And I have to say that yes, I do feel that 95% of the encounters I've faced thus far have felt fair. For every room I've seen that's filled with poisonous gas, I could usually find a switch to deactivate the poison spewing trap, or a poison immunity potion. For every seemingly impossible to beat enemy, I've come up with either a strategy or a way to get away from them. Right now the game feels good to play, and in the end, isn't that all that matters? Visuals. Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room. The graphics. While not a bad-looking game by any stretch of the imagination, I personally think the game has pulled off the pseudo 2.5D aesthetic very well. That being said, we do unfortunately live in a world where some people will refuse to try this game based solely off of the fact that the graphics in this game are simplistic to say the least. And that is a shame, because no screenshot will do games like these justice. Hopefully, if you're like me, you decided to look past the simple graphics and give this game a shot. This is most definitely a case of don't judge a book by its cover. Negatives. While I don't have much to say in regard to negatives, other than the menus being a bit awkward in the beginning, or that some may pass on an otherwise great game due to the graphics, I will say that if you're not a fan of the roguelite genre, or dungeon crawlers in general, this game won't do much to change that opinion. It isn't revolutionary in any regard, but it does know what it is, and it is good at what it does. Final opinion. I like this game. It's fun, not very expensive, only $14.99 USD at the time of this review. It has a few issues, but nothing glaring enough that would stop anyone interested in playing another roguelite, especially if they love the genre, like myself. All in all, I'd recommend you buy this one. The devs definitely chose mechanics over graphics, but I think that was a good choice, especially for the genre. I don't know about you, but I'll always choose your Dragon's Dogmas over your Order 1887s. But that's just me. Now, I don't like to give ratings on my reviews, so I'll just leave you with my solid recommendation to buy this one. I don't think you'll be disappointed just so long as you know what you're getting into. And that'll do it for this review. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the developers at Ludo Motion and the publisher Digerati for the opportunity to play and review this game with the code that they gave me. Rest assured, I would have bought this one even if they hadn't reached out to me. Now, you all take care, and let me know what you thought of the review down below. I always like to give you guys better content if I can, but anyway, I'm going to go ahead and leave you with the rest of this run that I have going on in the background of this video, and yeah, you all take care. Bye-bye.